really our bodies are so smart that we really should be looking at being able to be they should be self-regulating without needing to constantly put in this stuff. Health should be easy. If it's not easy, it's dis-ease or disease.
Hello and welcome back to the Vibrant Wellness Podcast. I'm Dr. Emmie Brown, joined by our fantastic co-host, Melissa Gentile. Are you trying to tackle constipation without success? We all know the conventional wisdom. Drink more water, eat more fiber, take probiotics, and try magnesium. But what if we told you that these common remedies don't actually fix the problem? Today, we're thrilled to have Allison Jordan join the pod. Allison is a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, founder of Better Belly Therapies, and host of a top 100 alternative health podcast, the Better Belly Podcast. Over the last 6 years, she's helped over 600 clients around the world find and address the root causes of their gut and health issues when nothing else has worked. Through years of experimentations and careful observation, she developed the Gut Healer System, a method that reduces symptoms like bloating, constipation, acid reflux, brain fog, fatigue, and hormone imbalance. In today's episode, we'll dive into root causes of and effective management strategies for constipation. Allison will shed light on why these common remedies might not be effective for everyone and introduce alternative strategies that address the underlying causes of constipation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Allison. We're so happy to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. So this is a good topic. I think it comes up oftentimes in when we're talking about gut health and hard to crack cases. And it's a very specific focus to have as a healthcare provider. So I'd love to know, Allison, how did you start doing what you're doing?
I had unsolvable constipation.
There you go.
Woohoo! So 10 years ago, 2015, that was kind of when it started. Seemed super random. I was living in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So I was right next to the University of Michigan Medicine and saw the best gastroenterologists that anybody could find and saw nutritionists. And I did the low FODMAP diet and I did colonoscopies and endoscopies and blood work. And
make it sound so fun.
Oh my gosh, it was horrible. And interestingly enough, nothing I did worked. And it was kind of suggested to me that it was my issue, that I was not being compliant somehow, that I must have still been eating some FODMAPs or I wasn't trying hard enough. And ultimately, my symptoms started snowballing where I went from just IBS with a constipation focus to also losing my hair and amenorrhea for 2 years. That medication could not restart. And all the doctors, OBGYNs, gastroenterologists said, we don't know what that is. You just happen to be a quote unquote healthy 22-year-old right out of college who just suddenly has no period and can't poop. So
that was placebo.
They didn't. And I never ended up, looking back, so my approach to SIBO now overlaps a lot of what I ended up doing to solve my constipation, but SIBO, I don't even call a root cause. So that's controversial, but SIBO is, yeah. SIBO can cause additional symptoms for sure. Just like constipation is a symptom. And then once you have constipation, it can cause more issues because you're not detoxing, for example, but it's not its own root cause. And so, yeah.
I feel like we could do a whole separate episode just on that.
Yes, I would love to. Yes.
Like that's really big. Yeah. SIBO not as a root cause. And I think when people have digestive issues or they're kind of going through this on their own, maybe they haven't discovered someone like you yet, they start researching, they get on the internet, they start looking at supplements, they start looking at resolutions, and usually not a fully integrative or holistic or functional approach. But they're probably going to come across things like fiber and water and probiotics and magnesium. These are some of the most common recommendations for people given to just alleviate constipation. But some people say that these don't help. Why is that?
So, and actually, I'm probably the only person I know of who just says it doesn't help. I mean, other than the people trying these methods, they're like, well, it's magnesium's supposed to help. Probiotics are supposed to help. That's what Google says. And that's the same advice I came across. I was looking at blog posts and Google and even using the University of Michigan's library to try and find what the heck do they have to say about IBS. I wrote a 20-page paper on IBS in my massage therapy schooling using University of Michigan medicine research that's available only to their own internal system because I had a law school friend who had access to that library, right? So I'm like, I know what they're seeing, and they don't have much. They didn't have a lot, and so at least at the time. So most people are saying these things don't work just by observing it. But for me, I started working backwards, not just observing it, saying, why aren't these things working? And the what's going on is if you really are dealing with chronic constipation and you've tried all these methods and they didn't work, it's because they're not getting to your root causes. And we're going to get to some of those root causes. But in some cases, yes, magnesium is going to help you poop. It's going to be you're just slightly magnesium deficient, slightly off in your electrolytes. You give yourself some and it works. So that type of advice proliferates as like, let's just start with something simple. And I'm all for that. Let's start with something like, you just need to drink some more water. If that fixes your constipation, let's not do the gut healer system and like what I had to go through to heal. But if all of these things haven't worked, you're now looking at root causes that people are not used to looking for. And so you're going to go from provider to provider who is like, fiber. Have you tried soluble fiber? Have you tried insoluble fiber? Have you tried flaxseed? Have you tried, like Metamucil? Have you tried so they're just throwing different types of stuff at you. So when none of these things are working, especially more doesn't work, different kinds, different brands don't work, it's pointing to a bigger issue. And likely it's plural issues. The body is really resilient. So another big issue with providers or when someone's seeking healing is that they're still thinking in layers of one issue. It's just candida. It's just a parasite. It's just magnesium. It's just fiber. But the body is so resilient and it can overcome one issue, one hiccup, one, super hot day where you hiked a lot and you were dehydrated or you drank too much alcohol. But when it's chronic, we're really looking at a bigger issue. Then when you give yourself, and I'm not going to get into all of these things here, like why does water not work? Why does magnesium? I could give brief language to some of these things, like magnesium is not the only electrolyte in the body, coincidentally, and sodium, potassium are often deficient when magnesium's deficient. So that can be a problem and part of the bigger picture of healing someone's constipation. But fiber, do you guys know how fiber became this like the history of like when it became known as a constipation fixer?
Please tell us.
Yeah.
It happened with Dr. Kellogg, right? So Kellogg this is really interesting. So Kellogg, before he was this dried cereal millionaire guru, he simply wanted to see how he could increase the health of the American population. And he started a sanitarium in Battle Creek, Michigan, coincidentally close to where I'm from. And it was considered a premier wellness destination. It was huge. It had over 30 acres and over 30 buildings on it. They had a hospital with a research facility and a nursing school. They had their own sanitarium food company. And they were trying all different things like exercise and diet change to see how we could improve the health of people who visited. And one of the things they found is this sugar-free dried brand cereal helps them poop. And that became so iconic that it spread like wildfire. And it became this bastion of like, if someone's constipated, give them fiber because it bulks up the stool. But what is ignored is what are some other components of fiber? Fiber is a prebiotic. What happens if your microbiome is not just deficient, it's dysfunctional? Because sometimes we're like, well, if your microbiome is, like there's low levels of all the little microbes, give them prebiotics. That makes you sound very smart. Give them prebiotics. Well, actually, if you have low levels of populations in a microbiome, other big reasons that might be happening is because of pathogens, because parasites, H. pylori, they will overcrowd those bacteria. They can also cause those bacteria to overgrow. What if you have an overgrowth problem of bacteria and you give someone fiber? Now you're giving this really dense food to somebody who can't digest it. There's other pathogens creating inflammation, creating dysbiosis in the microbiome. And you can actually that's where people start to say, I took fiber and it made me worse. My bloating got worse. My stool slowed down. You're like, wait, fiber is supposed to make you poop. Why is the motility look like it's regressing? It gave me more pain. I was more constipated. And it's because you have to consider, you can't just live by a maxim of like fiber fixes it. You have to be thinking about, how is fiber working at step by step? When it enters the stomach, there has to be good stomach acid levels to break it down and start preparing that food to be semi-functional for the microbiome. And then you have to consider the microbiome, et cetera. And that's just not being considered. And that's why it can actually make things worse. And they're not good. They're not just good automatic fixes, especially when it's a chronic constipation case.
So a lot to unravel here. And I hope that we can tap into some of that. I think that we will, and we'll talk about those root causes, Allison. But I'd love to know, is there a surprising tip? You gave us a kind of a surprising backstory on fiber and maybe why not to try it if your constipation is chronic. But if you use symptom support, maybe when you're just first meeting a client and they are just desperate for some relief as you start to work up root cause, are there any surprising tips that maybe most people aren't familiar with that comes to mind for constipation relief?
Yeah. If somebody is going to have any quick relief, I find that there's one thing in particular that I really like to do, and it's going to be pairing magnesium citrate. So you're like, magnesium can be in this equation. We don't have to kick it out, but citrate, since it doesn't get absorbed into the body, it stays in the bowel, pulls water into the bowel, but combining it with potassium and sodium. And I actually have something I use called a potassium shot. And it's got 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 1,000 milligrams of potassium, using cream of tartar and like Himalayan sea salt or Celtic sea salt or Celtic salt, kind of whatever salt you prefer. I know everybody's got their different opinions on what's the cleanest version of salt, but just not table salt, basically, is what I tell my clients. And you mix it with some water, some lemon juice. It doesn't taste great, but it's a high dose, and you take it on an empty stomach. So I tell my clients, take the potassium shot. And if they're going to do magnesium citrate, they can try both, though sometimes that's actually too much, coincidentally. Take it on an empty stomach, minimum 30 minutes before breakfast. So you've got this nice empty stomach. It's going to pass through the bowels a little bit faster. It's usually, if they're not in capsules, that's also better. So like calm powder is magnesium citrate opposed to a capsule. Capsules are better for traveling, so they still have a use, but especially if it's loose, just much more quick acting. By the time you give it 30 minutes, it might not work, or they might get a bowel movement after their meal or sometime later in the morning, but you can also do it again the next or by the end of the day, right before they go to bed. And I've never had it cause issues with people trying to poop in the middle of the night or like needing bowel movements, but it just gives them that nice AM PM rev. And I will say sometimes this still doesn't work. And I always tell my clients, do not panic. Right. You don't need to panic if it doesn't work. And sometimes managing someone's inability to poop is more of a it's more mindset, and trying to encourage them not to get hyperfixated on it, because there can be panic involved. There's pain. And if there's pain, I'm like, look, let's find a way that we can get you out of pain so you're not so uncomfortable, whether that's an enema or something, right? Or a colonics or a laxative even. But as long as we deal with mindset and just say, you know what, can you be tolerant if this doesn't work for a day or two? Or can we like know that you can still totally heal even if this method of magnesium citrate and potassium shot morning and night doesn't work? Yes, you will still be fine. Right. I have clients that it doesn't work for, but the number of clients that it helps is so high. And then they always end up laughing because they'll keep doing it. And eventually, as we deal with the root causes, it's quote unquote overdosed. And they'll suddenly say, well, I'm still doing my potassium shot and magnesium citrate, but now my stool is loose and I'm going 5 times a day. I'm like, because you're over medicating, just like we can over medicate on thyroid medication when the body starts to truly heal internally. And so we just pull it back, and they look at you like you're magic and a god. And you're like, nope, we're just listening to your body and what it says it needs. Exactly. So I actually have that recipe for the potassium shot and magnesium citrate in a free resource that I give to people. Just go to betterbillytherapies.com/constipation. And I have that recipe in there.
Any misconceptions people have about these remedies?
Usually the big thing is they're very short-sighted. They think that that's it. They think they download it's called 3 Natural Remedies to Constipation PDF. And they download that and they think that's everything I have. And then they just stay stuck in that, I'm just going to keep doing water, fiber, magnesium, and the potassium shot the rest of my life. And you're like, you never I don't take the potassium shot every day. I take very few medications every day. I'm pregnant, so I take a prenatal. I take some iron, because I'm pregnant. There's things that I'll take for specific reasons, but really our bodies are so smart that we really should be looking at being able to be they should be self-regulating without needing to constantly put in this stuff. Health should be easy. If it's not easy, it's dis-ease or disease.
I like that statement, that last statement there.
Yeah, that's such a good way to think about this. And it's a quick way of reminding people that we don't want to be taking stuff forever. So, and I love this quick shot you talked about. Is that what it's called? The
potassium shot.
Potassium shot. Yes. The potassium shot, that experimentation, it teaches the patient so much about their body. It's, if it will respond, that's great. But if it doesn't respond, that emphasizes the need to really look further and look for that root cause. And even if it does work, as you said, sometimes you get to the point where it's working too well, and then they understand how to really be in tune with their body, understand what to do, maybe not turn to you for every single, question. So I think it's a really nice way to get people in tune with their bodies, and to start to understand when to use the as needed remedies like the potassium shot, and when to maybe work on that deeper work, which is what I want to get into next, the actual root causes of constipation. And you've got 5. So, Allison, will you please walk us through those 5 root causes?
I'd love to. So I will say, if you're familiar with functional medicine, some of this will sound boring, or I already knew some of these things, Allison. They haven't fixed my constipation or my client's constipation. So my disclaimer is that when I share these 5 things, sometimes it's the combination, sometimes it's the order you do things in, and sometimes it's the actual protocols to address the issue. So just to say, if you feel like I've already done that with these people, there can be nuances still. And I'm not trying to hide the nuances. It's just that it is only one podcast episode. So we're gonna do the broad oversweep of what the 5 things are. So number 1 is gonna be poor digestion. And we're thinking low stomach acid, low bile production, low pancreatic enzymes, 1, 2, or 3 of those things. So low stomach acid, if you want to dive deeper into this, are you okay if I share podcast episodes for my podcast?
Please. Yes.
Because I want people to be able to get the breadth or the depth of what this is. I have episode 131, which is 4 steps to end acid reflux and constipation at the same time. Since low stomach acid is the number 1 cause of acid reflux, but when you have low stomach acid, you can't break down protein and fat appropriately, as well as also handle kind of denser foods like fiber. And so when those foods hit your microbiome, the microbiome has to do the job that your digestive enzymes didn't do, and that can slow transit a lot. The big thing now has to be, you have to ask yourself, what is causing the low stomach acid? Betaine HCl is not going to fix everything, especially if H. pylori is present. You could actually make your client's symptoms worse. So you need to be thinking about, is H. pylori present? What are the true causes of low stomach acid? Commonly zinc deficiency can be involved in that. But that's one big thing is most of my clients who have chronic constipation, at the right time are going to be doing a low stomach acid protocol to fix the root causes of their low stomach acid. Next, you have bile, which is typically going to be a liver issue, but sometimes like a gallbladder or common bile duct issue. I cover this a little bit more in episode 118 called Liver, the number one thing you can do to ease bloating and PMS. And for any non-practitioners listening, if you're like, can I just have a liver protocol? I actually do. It's one of the few protocols that I give away because most protocols, I don't think it's safe to just like know what a parasite protocol is and like think it's going to solve all your problems. But you can get a liver protocol at betterbellytherapies.com/liver and go grab that. But you want to thin the fluid inside of the liver. You want to make sure there's no adhesions around the common bile duct. And I'm actually going to get into that. That's the fifth big issue that can cause constipation is visceral adhesions. But it can be specific to bile causing issues there. And then once the bile is thin and there's no adhesions around the gallbladder and common bile duct, you are going to usually see a lot of improvement there. And then pancreatic enzyme issues, which is interesting here, where part of the pancreatic enzymes, you have that cholecystokinin, and I actually don't say that word very often, so I apologize that I might have actually said it wrong. But you also have the secretin, which follows stomach acid. You need acidic chyme to enter the duodenum to trigger the release of secretin, which is then going to signal the pancreas to release its bicarbonate-rich fluid and neutralize the acidity. But if you don't even have a high acidity chyme coming in, it can actually cause the pancreas to underreact to food entering the small intestine. So I often find that my clients don't need to be on pancreatic enzymes for much longer after we start building stomach acid back up safely. So that's number one is digestive enzymes, and taking a digestive enzyme is not enough. I don't know if you guys have ever looked at like how many it's not liters. It's I didn't pull this data for the. I've looked at it before, but if you look at how much stomach acid our stomach makes per meal or in a day, it is like 10 or 20 times more than what is inside of a stomach acid, like betaine HCl pill. And so it's our digestive enzymes that we're going to get at clients, whether it's lipase or betaine HCl or whatever it is, it's still just the tip of the iceberg. It's not really the intelligence of the body. And so we want to restore the body's ability to do its own processes, and that's going to get the best results. So that's one reason if you're like, well, I've already given them stomach acid, ox bile, and, pancreatic enzymes as a supplement, why doesn't it fix it? I find it's because supplements are still woefully inadequate compared to what the body can do.
What about bitters, Allison? Real quick.
Bitters can stimulate the tongue, but bitters also are supposed to be stimulating bile production. If your bile is super thick, if your gallbladder is adhesed around with visceral adhesions around it, or the same with the common bile duct, and you can't even get the fluid from the liver and gallbladder to the duodenum, then like bitters are going to have an underwhelming effect. The other thing to consider is one of the root causes we're about to come up against is that bile is a natural chelator of toxins and heavy metals. And so if you have somebody who has just a lot of toxins and heavy metals, whether that's biotoxins like mycotoxins or toxins being secreted from parasites, or again, the heavy metals, the biles, it has more job than it can do on its own, given multiple root causes at the same time. So I find that bitters, I still give clients bitters. I give clients digestive enzymes, but I tell them it is not a magic pill. And this is to almost just moderately, it's not even going to alleviate the constipation, to simply get as much as we can out of the food they're eating and reduce sources of inflammation and increase binding of toxins through bile flow as much as we can.
It's adjunctive, which is how we should think of supplements, generally speaking, anyway.
Yeah. Number 2, root cause, hidden pathogens. I do have a 7 pathogen series on my podcast where I dive deep into each of these pathogens, into why the lab testing missed it, kind of things to look out for when a client says, I already had testing for H. pylori. Well, what type of testing was it? That can be a big issue, is that they actually have it, even though they have a test that says they don't. or like what are protocols that are insufficient for these different pathogens. So even if a patient, I have all the times, I have clients to come and say, I've done 3 candida cleanses and 2 parasite cleanses. And I'm like, well, clearly some things, either there's a pathogen in there that's not being found, or the protocols themselves were dysfunctional or not done in a good order, or not all the root causes were dealt with. But like, it's not intimidating to me when someone's like, I've done 3 candida cleanses. But the pathogens are H. pylori, candida, SIBO, C. diff, parasites, mold, and Lyme. And these are not, I'm not saying all of these directly cause constipation, but they're going to add on burden to the body that reduces nutrient sufficiency, which can reduce stomach acid levels, which can add on toxins to the liver. So the liver is overburdened and can't produce bile the way it needs to. So it's like these pathogens, they're not all one-to-one direct correlations. I'd say H. pylori has a pretty strong correlation because of how it lowers stomach acid. Mold has a strong correlation because of how it damages the myoenteric plexus, which is the nerves that are talking to the gut to tell the muscles to move. So muscle, enteric, the gut nervous system. So mycotoxins from mold can damage the gut nervous system and set someone up for constipation. That's a huge reason why digestive enzymes often might not work, is if this person's being mold exposed and you're not getting them out of the environment, you're not testing them for mold, you're not helping bind mycotoxins in the body. Binding is its own story, of course, when you constipation's involved. So I'm not advocating for charcoal binding or anything here, but all that being said, those are the 7 pathogens that I'm constantly looking for in clients. Not every pathogen for not every client. It really depends on their, like, look at their symptoms, look at their health history, look at what labs they do or don't have. You can use all that data to like not make them do a bajillion labs every time they show up. But in my mind, I'm checking off a box of, for every pathogen, whether I do a test or not, do they have symptoms that suggest I should be doing a test for it? Do they have a test that proves that they don't have this?
I love how you laid that out, Allison, because we're constantly talking about clinical correlation with labs, especially functional medicine labs. We want to think about the history, the other exam findings, what pertinent exam findings, because you can really piece together a story using the information the patient has already brought to you. So thank you for speaking to that and saying it so beautifully. I think that's extremely important and a good reminder.
Yeah. So that's the second root cause. And it's typically involved if there's low digestive enzymes, there's a hidden pathogen. I've just never seen the two not paired together. Number 3 is heavy metals and nutrient deficiencies. I do pair them together since heavy metals will cause nutrient deficiencies. Nutrient deficiencies set you up more easily to absorb heavy metals. I have some big clauses on this. Don't do a heavy metal protocol first. In my experience, I know some people have had success with doing it first, but it's usually the body's not ready to get rid of those pathogens, especially if you're constipated on top of it. And then the other thing with nutrient deficiencies, like when it's constipation focused, we already covered this a little, but only looking or thinking about magnesium as the only nutrient deficiency is just such a red flag. You really need to be thinking about potassium and sodium. And everybody's got their own favorite way of doing it. I think blood work is going to be one of the worst ways for those 2 minerals, because the body works so hard to maintain homeostasis in the blood that you're just not going to get a good cellular concept. But I personally don't do tons of micronutrient testing, though I know some people love that and like really are familiar with that testing. I really like the HTMA because you're going to be able to, I just know how to read it. And I like its price point. I like lots of things about it, even though has its own limitations in interpreting the test. But yeah, like 9.5 times out of 10, my clients' HTMAs are just like the sodium potassium's just bottomed out. So, and part of that is the adrenal glands are controlling sodium and potassium via aldosterone. And if you have someone who's had some chronic illness for a while, chronic constipation, chronic pain, chronic anxiety about their condition, they've been having low, medium to high grade adrenal response, which is going to boost that aldosterone levels. And now their sodium and potassium's depleted, which coincidentally you need for good blood pressure, not having cold hands and feet, and good muscular contraction in the gut.
Makes sense.
Number 4 is going to be food sensitivities. And this one I do list, and my big disclaimer for it is it's often given too much blame. So your clients come to you and they're like, I've already done 20 billion diets, elimination diet, gluten-free, dairy-free, and that might not be every population. Some people are like, I will only change my diet if a test shows me all the red flags, which is great. I love those people too. But the biggest issue I find is typically that one of two issues. There's undiscovered food sensitivities. I actually was in this case. I miscarried in 2020 with my first pregnancy. And I can't blame it on a food sensitivity, but I did do my blood work. My histamine was sky high. I'd never seen it that high. And I was like, what could cause this elevation? And I realized I had never done a new food sensitivity test that I was starting to do with clients and get really good results. And that was the Zoomer test from Vibrant. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take my own medicine. I wasn't against it or anything. I just didn't think I needed it because my symptoms were so low. And I did that, like the corn Zoomer, the grain Zoomer, the wheat, just to check, because I knew I was sensitive to wheat, but I wanted to see if I was getting exposure. And sure enough, I came back with really sky high corn and rice sensitivity. And those are two dietary changes I made to my life. And even before getting pregnant again, I was already seeing my energy's higher. I'm thinking more clearly. And those were things that I did not perceive as being in a bad state. It simply was better.
When you took them out, you're saying?
Once I took them out.
Improvement that you weren't expecting.
Yeah. So undiscovered food sensitivities can be a big issue for the populations that I work with, that they've tried some things. The other big issue is what I call leaky gut mediated food sensitivities, which is you discover through whole food testing. But protein peptide testing, which is what Zoomers do, I find they don't change from testing to retesting to retesting. Given that, with the one caveat being if they haven't eaten the food in 6 months, it's not going to show up on the Zoomer. but that if they're eating those foods, I just do not see them changing. They seem much more permanent to me. And so for my clients, when they're taking an MRT test, when they're doing a Viome or a Tiny Health food sensitivity test, these are whole food sensitivity tests. And they're not protein peptides as small as what the Zoomer does. And when they retake those tests, the results are different every time because their body is relearning new foods to be, whatever food they're eating the most of, they'll develop that new sensitivity, and it drives the client and patient crazy. They feel paranoid now about food. They're confused. And all it's telling them is your leaky gut's not fixed. It's not about the food anymore. It's just saying you need to fix the gut lining, and all those changing food sensitivities are going to stop. And then you'll have some that are probably permanent and are unchanging. And the Zoomer test I have found. And I actually like pairing the Zoomer bundle. I do the Zoomer bundle with the food sensitivity panel, which is whole food sensitivity testing. But I love them together because you can kind of see different ways that the body may or may not be reacting. You'll get the wheat Zoomers on fire, and then wheat on the food sensitivity panel for you guys is crystal clear and doesn't care. And clients can get frustrated, but I'm all it is you're asking different parts of the immune system. How do you feel about this? And if you're not asking all the relevant parts, you might be missing the part of the important parts of the story.
Yes. Thank you for speaking to the difference between the Zoomers and the food sensitivity profile. That's very helpful. I don't think we've clarified that on the podcast so far.
This was told to me. It was taught to me from a clinical advisor in the FDN program, and she's a celiac specialist. And she and I was just starting to get more and more meetings with her. I'm how are you getting these client results you get? And she was here's something not a lot of people know about, and told me about that. I was this is amazing. And that's when I switched to Zoomers to see what happened, because I was really underwhelmed with the results with the MRT. And I'm this is what was missing.
Nice. So are we at 5, or
we have one more, and then we're at 5. So the last one's physical adhesions. And I did allude to this. Physical adhesions, we're typically thinking in terms of fascia, though sometimes there can be other things going on as well, that chiropractic care, so skeletal or something that might be going on. But organs are held in the body by fascia. Your liver is literally like hammocked into your rib cage by all these different visceral ligaments that are on the left side and the right side and in the middle. And we talk about some of these ligaments, but we don't, unfortunately, in modern mainstream medicine, with even physical therapy, there's no talk about the fact that these ligaments can get denser, they can get shorter, they can become less flexible. And visceral manipulation is one of the most effective therapies I've found. It was developed by Dr. Jean-Pierre Barral, who's a PT and a DO in France. And he started developing this through his own frustrations with client improvements. And it has so many far-reaching implications, not just constipation specific, but can I give a story of maybe
Yes.
I have two stories that I'm thinking of clients who they worked with me and they did the parasite stuff or they did the stomach acid stuff or H. pylori, and there was some improvement in the constipation, but it still wasn't consistent. And one girl in particular I'm thinking of, I said, "Why? Just come in. Let's do a visceral manipulation evaluation and some treatment." And in her first session, I didn't even get pulled into the belly. I got pulled into her left clavicle. And I'm working on the left clavicle and some of the viscera, like pleural ligaments for the lung tissue underneath the left clavicle. We're working on different, again, usually mostly fascia. And I asked her, like, has something ever happened to your left clavicle? And she's like, why are you asking me about my clavicle? I thought we were here for constipation. I'm not that dumb. I know where the large intestine is. And she's like, I don't think so, blah, blah, blah. Send her home. She poops every single day super easily for the next week. She comes back for the next appointment and she's like, what happened? I'm like, well, you were getting pulling from your fascia up in the left clavicle all the way down to the left descending colon.
Oh my gosh.
It's all left side, right? All right. And the descending colon, the splenic flexure has a ligament that goes from the colon to the just making one diaphragm, right? And so if the diaphragm can't expand fully on that left side because of restrictions up into the thoracic region, then you're not going to get as much pumping and bellowing and movement of that the colon wants to get to move food and get that peristalsis. So you're getting the peristalsis signal, which is sometimes what's missing. Sometimes you're missing the signal or the signal's weak, but it couldn't move. And so it turns out that I did another evaluation. She needed more work on her left clavicle. She's now like, okay, I believe you a little bit more. We worked on that side. Towards the end of that appointment, she goes, oh, I fell off the swing when I was 5 years old and broke my left clavicle and my arm was in a sling for,
She had just remembered that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She's like, would that do it? She was like, but she's in her like late 20s and she was like, but that was so long ago. I was like, oh, no, the body does not forget that. And if you didn't get treatment on that tissue as you're growing, that tissue is going to get tighter and tighter and tighter. Especially as your body gets bigger and bigger and bigger relative to the scar and damage. And she just needed 2 sessions and she's been pooping like a pro since.
That's amazing. The body work component.
Yeah. And not everyone needs it. That's the thing. So like in my program, the Gut Healer System, I give my clients 3 self-assessments they can do to even just get a gist of what is their fascial tension load in their body, and potentially could visceral manipulation be more or less helpful. Because if we just land blast our clients with like do all 5 of these, not all 5 might not be equally relevant to every person. But what I do find is that thinking one of these will solve every issue is almost always wrong.
Yes. It's multifactorial oftentimes with these chronic cases. It's true. We're coming up on time, Allison, and this has been jam-packed already. I want to ask one last question, and I think there are listeners out there who might say, what about really complex cases such that there's a tortuous colon, megacolon? I'm familiar with toxic megacolon. The professor I had who taught our GI course, she thought it was hilarious. She did this whole like heavy metal, thing into the microphone, into this big lecture. So funny. So toxic megacolon stuck with me, but I didn't realize we could have chronic megacolon. So I think that's what you're referring to, not the
Yeah.
megacolon.
Megacolon being like clients will say, well, my doctor says I have a megacolon, usually from being constipated for too long. It's kind of like the tissue gets stretched out and that the muscles stop responding and it's just too large. Sometimes the doctors will suggest it's congenital or like you just naturally have this megacolon, but usually it's from being constipated too long.
Right.
Yeah, acquired.
And long-term laxative use. So all these really complex cases wherein maybe a lot of their doctors say, well, this might just be difficult to navigate. We'll try to manage it the best we can. How about those patients? Are those hopeless cases, or do you have experience really getting through to those tough cases?
I have, and this was what was most mind-blowing to me when I was. My practice was burgeoning, and I remember trying to be very humble and like with my clients, like not making promises. I wasn't coming onto the scene like I'm the constipation fixer. I was just like, how far can I take this? Like how many things can we prove wrong that someone comes in saying, well, my doctor says it won't get better. So yeah, I've had the tortuous colon, megacolon, redundant colon. I mean, some of these things are the same different terms for the same thing, but laxative abuse, sometimes related to an eating disorder, sometimes related to like, I have only been able to poop by using a laxative for the last 10 years. So my doctor says my body doesn't know how to poop anymore and it never will. Right. I've never had one of those cases keep me from getting them to poop on their own. And that I know that's just subjective data, but I've never had that happen. The only thing I've seen that's kept people from healing is when they give up on the process because it hasn't worked in a certain point that they thought it was going to work by. And sometimes they get those precognitions from like listening to testimonials on my podcast. They'll be like, well, this person had a constipation for 6 years and it healed in 1 month. Like that was my client, Anitra. And that's like episode 117. Or like this client I had one client who probably got really, really close to quote unquote giving up on my process. And her name was Helene and she was in her 60s and she'd had 2 surgeries on her colon and had all these scarring and adhesions. And she was like, I don't think I can be fixed. And it took her 6 months to get the result that some people get in 1 month, right? So I find that there can be the despair and mindset component that's what will limit people the most. But the people who stick with what like I almost sound like a jerk. Like they just stick to what I say. But for whatever reason, I understand constipation and I've found to make it that all the things that we've discussed here today, megacolons and laxative abuse, none of them keep them from healing.
None of these things are going to stop you from getting to the bottom of it. You're driven, and I love that. There's always something that I think we can do. There's so many different things you've already discussed that are oftentimes overlooked, unfortunately. So thank you so much for sharing all that with us.
Yeah, thank you for going into such great detail, Allison, especially breaking down the top, 5 causes that you touched on. I have so many questions. Like I wish we had 2 hours today because I feel like it sparked so many things in me that I still need to ask you. So there's definitely probably going to be a part 2 to this at some point. We'd love to have you back on sometime. But like I said, thank you for going into such great detail. I know our audience, whether they're patients or practitioners even, are going to take a lot from this. And thank you for sharing all the resources that you have too, so that people can go on and listen to your other episodes that deep dive into some of these things or download some of your free guides. If anyone tuning in wants to connect with you or access some of your resources, where can we find you online?
You can go find me at the Better Belly podcast, which I know we've talked about, top 1% global podcast. I'm on Instagram at Better Belly Therapies. And you can also join my email list if you just want to get like a weekly email letting you know what the new podcast episode is. A great way to join my email list is just going and getting that free constipation download. So betterbellytherapies.com/constipation. And you get that free gift of the 3 natural remedies to constipation, including that potassium shot recipe. And then you get continuous resources from me.
I love it. We'll link this down below for you guys so you guys can find Allison online. And until next week, wishing us all vibrant health and wellness. Thank you, Allison.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for being here today. Don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so we can continue to pay it forward together. And remember, the key to longevity is knowledge. Keep learning, growing, and tuning in to the Vibrant Wellness podcast to discover the latest insights and strategies for optimal health. Join us again next week. And just a reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The views expressed by guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy of Vibrant Wellness. As always, consult your healthcare provider before applying any recommendations that you heard here today.